Hey guys, again, it's enough of that high security picking for a while. I'll try to change gears just a little bit and continue talking about these cool old locks. So this is another addition, another chapter to our cool old lock series. Here we have an Eagle brand. This is an old railroad lock, and it's made entirely of brass, so that when it's outside, securing railroad switches or junction boxes, that it doesn't corrode, doesn't rust. It can stand up to the weather for a long, long time. Eagle brand, I don't know how many of you have seen it, not around anymore, but if you look closely at the hasp, you can see it's a little bit worn, but you can still make out Terryville, Connecticut, USA. Very solid lock, very heavy, measures about 60 millimeters from side to side. And typical of all railroad locks, it comes with this chain so that they can tie it to the junction box or the switch. It doesn't, so the lock doesn't really walk away. I put the key on here, so you know how I am. I'm liable to lose it. This old key, if you take a look, let's talk a little bit about warded locks for a moment. This is a very old lock, and these keys are pretty old technology. Let me turn this over so I can use my pointer here a little bit. In warded locks, all of the locks internally are different, only that they put up these little metal walls called wards, and the little wards fit into these little grooves, and they're different depths, as you can see. So if you put the wrong key in and the little groove doesn't line up with that little metal ward, and I try to turn it, of course it can't. That little metal, the ward will stop it from rotating. Now, one of the things about these old locks is that they're all actuated from the top, just like modern locks, just like a master lock. I think you've seen those where they're spring actuated, and you'll pull the actuator back through some action on the top, and then of course the hasp opens. These work the same way. All of these wards are totally unnecessary. The only part that actuates this lock is usually the very tip of it. So if we want to bypass all of the security measures of these old locks, you can simply remove all of this warding. You file it off so you have a thin shaft, and then you have the actuator. And a lot of the old railroad guys did that. They didn't want to carry around a ring of 50 or 100 of these keys, because all the switches, of course, were different. So they just filed it all off, and they just had one actuator. Now, this might look strikingly familiar to something I think most of you have seen before, and that would be the skeleton picks. It's a bypass tool. These are pickable. In fact, they give you a pick. If none of these skeleton keys work, you can still pick it using this one on the end. But hopefully they'll work, and in my experience, about 90% of them do. Now, or even higher. For the sake of description, I'm going to call these small. They come in two sizes. You have the small, and I use that term based on the width of the tip. So you have the small single actuator and the small double actuator, and those are the two most common in almost all of these skeleton locks. And then we have the larger one, so the large single and the large double, and of course the pick. And now, before somebody sends a question, this one on the bottom, I made this one, and that's really to open like suitcase and briefcases. But again, if it's a warded lock, this opens literally 100% of them. So these are pretty simple mechanisms. First, I'll show you the lock does work perfectly using the old original key, and this is interesting in itself. These are pretty rare. I don't know how well you can make that out, but you can see the Terryville, Connecticut, USA. You have the Eagle brand logo, and then of course the Eagle Lock Company on the very tip there. On this side you have the logo, and then on the other side is where they stamp the code for this particular key. But we don't need that. We're going to use these bypass tools, but just to prove to you the lock does work, and it is a wonderful mechanism, really reliable. This is probably close to 80 years old would be my guess, but again, that's purely a guess. Okay, if I look at the actuator, and I want to use one of these bypass tools, we could guess, but you can use an educated guess. And the way I decide which of these 5 tools to use is I simply look at the keyway. And I place the key next to it, and this would be the small double actuator, and you'll notice that there's a lot of extra room there. So right away, I'm going to put the largest pick in there that I can fit to reach those actuators. So there's the double, and you can see if I can squeeze that in there, and that might be a good choice. So I always like to start with a double, because that means I don't have to mess around too much. have a better chance. And these really are the most successful ones, the singles. You just put it in there. Now, it won't be a perfect fit, so you may have to jiggle it around, but you'll eventually find a spring tension, and as soon as you turn it, it will work perfectly. So this really old lock at one time was the state-of-the-art in security, and yet today we all have access to a very cheap set of bypass skeleton keys that can defeat them all. So I guess that explains why we've moved on to medicos and abloys, eh? Anyway, it is a cool old lock, and I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about it. Thank you for your time. Everybody stay safe and stay legal.